Once you've seen something is possible, you start to see more people doing it.
Julian Weisser, the founder and CEO of Solo Founders and ODF. Why are we seeing more and more solo founders today?
I think that people have seen that the way that a lot of successful companies are built is with co-founders. That's totally reasonable. There are a lot of great companies that have been built with co-founders. What I like to describe though is what's happening there is the denominator delusion, where you see all the successful companies, but then you neglect to think about the denominator of how many unsuccessful companies there are with co-founders. And the numbers actually show that solo founded companies are more likely to be successful, but you just wouldn't know that because when you look at sort of the total number of successful co-founded companies, obviously it eclipses the number of successful solo founded companies, but the denominator there is the thing that people are missing out on.
Do you see the solo founder path being taken more than the co-founding path? Like, what does this look like over the next few years?
In the future, we'll actually see this flip happens where solo is the default. And that's not to say that an amazing co-founder isn't better than being solo. You could have an amazing co-founder and it could be excellent. We've seen that with ODF. But I think that the reality is that being solo is far better than 99% of the co-founders that you could have. I think that generally speaking, solo is a better way to get started and probably a better way to build the company overall.
All right. Welcome, Julian.
Hey, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Awesome to have you. And welcome to everybody tuning in to Fondo Live with Julian Weisser, the founder and CEO of Solo Founders and ODF.
Hey, we're here. We're going to talk about whatever you want.
We're going to talk about it all. We got the solo cup. We got the solo hats. And we got the man here. So yeah, excited to get started, man. So let's just kick things off about the solo founder movement that's happening. I mean, just today there was an article about a founder of Polymarket going solo. Like, what are your thoughts on, why is this happening? Why are we seeing more and more solo founders today?
I think it's one of those things where just like different physical achievements. So for instance, the 4-minute mile, once you've seen something is possible, you start to see more people doing it. And for a long time, I think that people have seen that the way that companies are built and a lot of successful companies are built is with co-founders. And that's totally reasonable. There are a lot of great companies that have been built with co-founders. What I like to describe though is what's happening there is like the denominator delusion, right? Where you see all the successful companies, but then you neglect to think about the denominator of how many unsuccessful companies there are with co-founders. And the numbers actually show that solo founded companies are more likely to be successful, but you just wouldn't know that because when you look at sort of the total number of successful co-founded companies, obviously it eclipses the number of successful solo founded companies, but the denominator there is the thing that people are missing out on.
Oh, interesting. And so you sort of discovered this through, you've been building companies for a long time and you've been building ODF for a while as well. You've helped over 1,000 people start companies. They've raised over $2 billion. So you've been at the forefront of helping people start companies. How did you find this trend? How did you see it show up?
Well, it's funny, right? Because ODF kind of was started with the premise of we should expand the surface area for people to explore what's next. And ultimately, part of that was who they might start a company with. And prior to ODF, there really was this perception that if you were looking for co-founders, the best co-founders would be people that you either went to school with or you worked with previously. That was a pretty constraining belief, right? If you felt that those were the only two people that you could start companies with, and you felt that starting a company with a co-founder was an essential ingredient, having that co-founder, well, then ultimately, one of two things would happen. Either you might start a company with somebody who's suboptimal to have as a co-founder, right? Because you're sort of constraining to that narrow search parameter of somebody you went to school with or somebody you worked with previously. Or you'd end up not starting a company because you're like, well, I can't find somebody to start a company with. I guess I'm not going to start a company, or maybe I should hold off and do that later, right? So with ODF, the whole premise was, let's expand that. Let's question whether or not those are the only people that you could start successful companies with. And let's open it up to have a wider pool of potential co-founders. And, it worked really well. We've been at it now for nearing 7 years, which is crazy. You did ODF 4, which is like surreal because we just did ODF 26 about a month ago. And the demand for ODF continues to grow. We've hit record number of applications over the last couple of cohorts. Every cohort is a new record in terms of application volume. But the thing that we saw is that we were right about the co-founder thing, right? So many great people started companies where they met their co-founders. Contra is a great company. They met their co-founders. Traba. These really wonderful companies got started. But if that was this sort of invalid constraint, the idea that you needed to have started start a company with people that you worked with or went to school with, what are the other sort of invalid constraints that are preventing great companies from getting started, or preventing great companies from actually having like a chance to actually thrive? And ultimately that led me to this idea of solo, which is we'd seen a bunch of people go through ODF not with the purpose of trying to find a co-founder, but just trying to find a community while they were building their companies on their own. So I saw that, but then I also just saw, great companies in the past. Everything, from like Michael Dell, right? It's a much older company, but that was a solo founded company. Amazon, right? There are all of these examples in the past. And then, of course, there were all these examples in the present. Celine Haliwa from Loyal, incredible company, incredible solo founder. Adil Khan, who's building MagicSchool. It's the fastest growing education company of all time. And it made me wonder, maybe there's this false belief that you need a co-founder in order to start a company, that's preventing great companies from getting started. Because again, if you believe that you need to have a co-founder to get started, maybe you don't start. And it's also maybe preventing companies that have potential from actually realizing it, right? Because if you end up having what I describe as a co-founder of convenience, and then that ends up blowing the company up before you even have a chance to get to some level of product market fit, well, maybe that company actually did have a lot of potential, but it was never realized because of some co-founder dispute. So for me, those things were the questions that were rolling around in my mind as I said, gee, it feels like there's a big opportunity to do something with solo founders to really give them the space to thrive. And also not even necessarily even from a product perspective, but literally just from a point of view perspective. Say solo is a valid path. In fact, it's probably a better path than just arbitrarily finding a co-founder because you're in some rush to get started and you think that in order to get started, you need a co-founder.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So solo is really helping just increase the number of companies. I mean, it's kind of back to your mission with ODF that you're talking about, how to increase the number of companies being started by great people is now there's this new path. And like, what does success look like, do you think, for this movement? Like, do you see the solo founder path being taken more than the co-founding path? Like, what does this look like over the next few years?
Well, there was this sort of joke back in the crypto days called the flippening, which was when like one cryptocurrency would be worth more than the other, right? And this flip would happen. And I think that we're going to see a flippening moment in solo founders. Right now, it's not the default for most people. Right now, it is considered sort of the outlier thing to do. It's unusual. If you're trying to pattern match to exactly what investors want to see, then you are going to be looking for a co-founder. But the reality is, I think that everybody is sort of lagging behind. And in the future, we'll actually see this flip happens where solo is the default. And that's not to say that a great co-founder, an amazing co-founder, isn't better than being solo. I think that you could have an amazing co-founder and it could be excellent. We've seen that with ODF, right? But I think that the reality is that being solo is far better than 99% of the co-founders that you could have. So unless you find that sort of rare needle in a haystack co-founder, and ODF helps you sort of increase the opportunity of finding that type of person. I think that generally speaking, solo is a better way to get started and probably a better way to build the company overall. That's not to say that, again, like there isn't an opportunity to build great co-founded companies, and this is even about the AI component, which we can talk about later. But I think that it's just generally true that if you think about the opportunity to build a successful company, one of the biggest things that gets in the way of building a successful company is co-founder disputes. And different people have different numbers around this, but it's largely agreed upon that 2/3 of the companies that don't die because they don't get to product market fit or because they run out of money. they die much sooner than that because the co-founders have these huge disagreements and they're irreconcilable.
That's pretty insane. 2/3, two-thirds of companies are falling apart because of co-founder disputes. Are there sort of best practices you've seen in just co-founding relationships? Kind of going back to the ODF side of things where you're helping people start company with or without a co-founder. There's been over 1,000 companies, and you've been doing it since COVID. That's when we met over Zoom. Are there any best practices, or is there a better way to navigate, things like this? Or is that just too hard and not worth it?
Well, I think that if you want a co-founder for specific reasons out, and I actually put together a blog post on Text with Founders about this. But I think that if you want a co-founder, there are valid reasons for wanting a co-founder. Certain industries might make more sense to have co-founders than others. If you want to have a co-founder and it's not just because you're pattern matching to what VCs want or something like,
Who does that?
well, a lot of people, unfortunately, we can go on a rabbit hole here, and I'll try not to go too deep on it. But I think that there's this phenomenon that I like to describe as contortionism. And there are contortion artists who've existed in the world. Like, contortion art has been something from ancient times, right? This idea that people would contort their bodies as a form of art. But it was never a big thing. It never caught on. Even though there are contortion artists now, at Cirque du Soleil or something, it is not a particularly popular art form. And that's because there isn't much status, there isn't much, money associated with it. The thing is, though, while there aren't many contortion artists in the world, there are many people who can contort their lives to what they think other people want to see, right? And I think that many people who are building companies, unfortunately, contort their lives and contort their art, which is their company, to be what they think other people want to see. When the reality is and usually, unfortunately, it's investors, not customers. If it was customers, like that's maybe a good thing. But the reality is they're contorting to what they think investors want to see. And I think that that's generally unhealthy for the company. And I think it's especially unhealthy for the individual. But back to your question about how do we actually prevent, co-founder sort of fallout, I think that there's a couple of things, right? Easy ones. The first one is don't do it on some sort of set timeline for other people. So if an investor tells you, well, we'd invest, but you have to find a co-founder first, not a good thing, right? Because ultimately you're going to rush into it. Almost all of the worst sort of co-founder breakup stories I've heard come from somebody pressuring them to find a co-founder in order to receive investment. Another way to do this, I think, is like understanding what you assume or don't assume about a person. I actually have seen that with ODF, when people met co-founders through ODF instead of through their personal network, either somebody they went to school with or worked with previously, they didn't have all these assumptions. And if you've worked with somebody previously or you're friends with them, you might have some assumptions about how they think about the world or what their motivations are that don't actually translate from your existing relationship to the co-founder relationship. And I think the cool thing about starting with someone that you don't have any sort of prior relationship with is that you don't have any of those built up kind of biases or beliefs that you've kind of manufactured or that you're trying to translate from one relationship to a new relationship. So I think that if you can actually find people where you're starting that relationship from the get-go as sort of a prospective co-founder, then I think that ultimately prevents a lot of the assumptions that are dangerous. And then I think the last thing is, if you just really make sure you pre-mortem things with that person and have these honest discussions, there have been all sorts of people who've made these different templates and documents, and we share them all with the ODF community. We haven't made our own because, frankly, we think that it's, we think authorship is really important with companies. So we don't want to say, you have to use this document or use this formula for finding if your co-founder is a good fit. Ultimately, this is a very personal decision, and the way that you do that is really personal as well. Some people might want to do personality type sort of tests, right?
Yeah.
But some people might think that that's woo and not something that they actually like.
That's
So,
such a good point.
so I think that let people figure out the way to do it, but ultimately make sure that they spend that time to kind of do the pre-mortem to understand where things could go wrong and talk through that together.
Awesome. And now for the solo path, like you mentioned that, the more that people see this happen successfully, more it's presented as an option, the quicker people are like, yeah, actually, I don't need to, square peg round hole for this investor who thinks I need a co-founder to succeed? Like what, how early are you seeing, how much earlier are you seeing people decide that now? Is it a trial and error thing? Like, oh, I'm looking for a co-founder, I can't find one, I'm going solo. Or you know what, this is the path now, I'm not even going to look for a co-founder.
It's really interesting that you ask, because I kind of would have thought that people had considered solo and they just sort of threw it out for one reason or another. But the reality is that it's usually not on most people's radars. They just didn't even think about it. And I was talking to a deal from MagicSchool, solo founder. He's building AI tools for teachers and for students in school districts. And it's just been a remarkable success story. He was a former high school principal, though. He had no startup experience. So when I was talking to him about being a solo founder recently, I said, what was the thing that caused you to be, he said, it wasn't something that I actually really gave too much thought about, because I didn't realize that there was such a strong belief in co-founders, because he was an outsider to this, right? So it wasn't like he made this decision and it felt like it was going up against what he'd heard from other people. It was more just like, well, he founded and ran a high school, and he didn't have a co-founder of his high school that he ran. It was a public high school in Colorado. So he was used to doing things sort of solo. And it didn't seem like such a weird idea for him to be solo when it came to building a company. So I think that for some people, if they don't have that pre-existing sort of like, you have to follow this formula that all the other people say you should follow, or the investors say that they're looking for, or accelerators say that they're looking for, then they don't necessarily even think this is very weird. Right. But if you're sort of in the soup, the startup soup, and you're kind of like around and sort of like hearing all the things, you're going to have people ask you, oh, who's your co-founder, right? Where did you meet your co-founder? All of that sort of stuff. And then also, sometimes you hear how investors pass on a company because they're a solo founder. I think that the reality is that they're passing on the company for other reasons that they just don't want to admit. Like it's easier to say, oh, we'd love to fund you if you had a co-founder, right? Versus it's like, oh, we actually just don't want to invest. It's a great company, and the investor believes it's a great company, and they believe it's a great founder. They'll invest regardless if it's solo or not. But I think that for most people, it wasn't even on their radar in the startup world.
Yeah.
So when we ran ODF 26, which is the first cohort that we ran ODF, after having a solo founders program cohort, the amount of people who decided that they wanted to be solo after was really high. And I think it was shocking to me how high it was. It was over half of the people in the cohort.
Wow.
But it was shocking how high it was, but I also think it was healthy, because ultimately, I think that those people are more likely to find amazing co-founders if they decide to have a co-founder, if they just get started. And I think that many of them will also determine that they didn't actually need a co-founder in the first place to make the progress. And it's better to do that than to have, this bad situation where they end up with a co-founder of convenience because they think that they need to have somebody plugged into that role in order to actually make the other progress that they need to make as a company.
That's incredible. So you've already had the flippening inside of ODF.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And like the thing that we're trying to do, and we have this program for solo founders. We can talk about that. But the main thing we're trying to do is to say, hey, solo is a valid path. It should probably be the default path. That's not to say that if you can find that amazing co-founder, that you shouldn't consider it. But you should be much more discerning about who you have as co-founders. And also, you shouldn't wait around necessarily to start your company for that perfect person. You should just get started.
I love that. That's incredible. Okay, so you're in cohort 26 now for ODF and in cohort number 2 for solo.
Yes.
You have met with thousands of founders. You have you're an angel investor, you're a VC, and you run a company.
Yeah, I don't identify as a VC, but so if anybody's listening to this or watching this, I like to support founders and other founders in any way that I can. Sometimes it's with money, but ultimately, I don't identify as a venture capitalist.
Okay, I like that. I love that. But you've helped companies in a lot of different ways, with capital, with advice, support, programming. I mean, you've seen these different generation of founders from like the crypto boom, the COVID boom, the crypto boom and bust, now the AI boom. Like, has anything changed in terms of characteristics that help founders succeed?
It's interesting. I think that what we've seen is perhaps even more of a transition to mimicry and trying to just like trend chase than maybe we've seen ever before. I think that the compression of sort of like mimicry and sort of following a path that they've seen work for others has probably exploded more now than it has ever in the past. A couple of examples, of course, are like the Cluely style videos and the controversy. There's also, of course, like the blank company of blank, right? You know, the something company of California or whatever, New York, which isn't to say that those aren't good companies that are making those Cluely style videos or that are making the sort of the naming convention, adopting that naming convention. But I do think it's somewhat sad because I think that those companies that are really good companies are sort of constraining their originality because they're trying to like pattern match off of something else. It's like, you all are super talented. I think that you can create really amazing things. Don't just constrain yourself to whatever form, create your own form. Like try and do something that other people copy versus copying other people.
How much does it matter to fuck up along the way or not, right? I mean, trying pattern matching seems safe. Yeah, is it really that risky to not pattern match on those things?
The thing that I always really hate about the people who do like the make blank great again is that like they're not actually accruing very much value when they sort of like do that. They're just accruing value to MAGA, right? So it's like wow, you're kind of yes, sure, you're latching onto a trend. So like people are like, oh, cool, like that's like MAGA or like that's like Cluely, but they're thinking more about MAGA or Cluely than they are thinking about you. Like, come up with your own thing that other people do, hopefully, right? Like, I'd much rather be the Cluely in that situation, or I'd much rather be the, I think it was SF Compute. I think it was like the first big one, or maybe it was the browser company of New York. But like those were the two sort of originals that I'm aware of, at least in this generation. Obviously, what they're doing is somewhat of an homage to like past sort of industrialist businesses. But ultimately, I think that like I'd rather be the one that people are sort of trying to do that. Because then you're like, oh, cool. Like they're like, if I'm SF Compute, I'm very happy that people are doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Or if I'm the browser company, I'm very happy about that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around growth, around revenue growth, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of like commonality on how revenue is calculated across all of these, 0 to X million ARR and X months thing. But that's definitely caused a trend that has gotten a lot of investors talking about growth for startups, right? And investors have a different opinion about growth than founders have, right?
Yeah.
Because founders are in the trenches trying to figure out growth. And yeah, what are your thoughts on the like, you got to get to 100 million ARR like ASAP? I mean, I think it's a great ambition, but what are your thoughts on like how important thinking about that is compared to, just thinking about growth as a founder? Like how should founders think about growth in this like crazy AI hyper growth outlier period?
Well, it's a great question. One of my favorite writers, I think he's also an investor. He works at Contrary. His name is Kyle Harrison. He wrote this piece recently specifically about this topic around sort of like ramping revenue growth and things like that. The gist of it is that the discussion has largely been coming from these massive funds, these funds that need to plow tens of millions, if not 100 million or more into a company in order for their fund math to make any sense. And the reality is they won't even have $1 billion outcome be meaningful to them as an organization, as a venture fund. So I think that we're seeing this very strange phenomenon where and this is what Kyle writes about, but I believe in it, is that we're seeing this very strange phenomenon where people are only looking at companies that are going to be like $100 billion companies, and they're kind of discounting all of the others. And the reality is there are lots of funds that would be very excited to invest in companies that are going to have $1 billion outcome or a $10 billion outcome. And the reality is there's so many great businesses to be built there. I think that you should strive for, if you think that the business that you're trying to build could be $100 billion outcome, that's amazing. Like you should try and build that. But I would also say that there's so many great businesses that could be a $10 billion or $1 billion outcome. And it's a shame that the conversation has been so focused on growth. It essentially restricts people from thinking about building great companies that will be massively important for the world and massively important for them, their families, in terms of like personal like wealth and also their teams. So if you restrict to the types of businesses that people build, to the ones that are only going to have those big outcomes, and remember, we're not talking about big outcomes like the other ones are a $10 million outcome. We're talking about big outcomes where the ones I'm talking about are $1 billion outcome. This ultimately prevents a lot of great companies from getting started. So I think it's like generally bad discussion. I think it's right for a very specific type of VC to have that perspective, but I think that it's probably net negative for the startup, industry as a whole, because it really constrains people's thinking about what they can build and what can have a big impact on the world.
I love that. That's a great point. So as you're building the solo founder community and you're doing cohorts, you're curating this group of amazing founders, bringing them together. Can you tell us about the residency program?
Yeah.
And, how many people go through the program and what you're looking for?
When we realized that we wanted to do something for solo founders, we said, well, what are we going to do as our first thing? Should we do something that's kind of like ODF for solo founders? Should we do some sort of product for solo founders? What would it look like? And ultimately, I've been working sort of outside of On Deck before I became CEO of ODF. I had been working with solo founders sort of one-on-one, and just like doing a small amount of investment, spending a lot of time with them, to the tune of like, tens of hours a month, with one company, and working with them well before they raised any other money. And the idea was sort of be the first text, the first call, the person that they talk with every day, who is essentially helping them like do the things that they haven't done before. Because there's a lot of things especially if you're a first time founder, that you've just never done before. And you're great at understanding your business and your customers, but there's no reason that you should necessarily be great at the stuff that you've never done before and that's outside of your past experiences. So I did that. I did that for companies like MagicSchool, and worked with them well before they had sort of their seed round, and I introduced them to a lot of the people who invest in their seed round, that sort of thing. And I said, well, that would be cool. Like maybe I should just do that, what I did for MagicSchool and companies like MagicSchool, but do that more formally and do that as more of a program, and maybe they could interact with each other and support each other, because it was always just me and those companies. It was never like there was this sort of community around that. So it's like, maybe we should bring a bunch of those people together, and I could do that. And then I said, well, if they're going to be together, maybe it's going to be in San Francisco, maybe it's going to be in person. It's like, but shouldn't they also maybe work together in the same office at that point? I was like, co-working is kind of lame. I don't really like co-working. I think that it's weird when people clock out of co-working and they go home. Like, that's not the real way to build a startup, right? Especially in the early days. It's like, as I was thinking about it, it's like, how do people who are co-founders, especially if they're like a certain age, how do they build companies? It's like, well, the way they build companies is they live together, right? They actually live together, and they work out of their apartment, and they build great companies together. It's like, it's really sad that solo founders who are going to build these incredible businesses don't have that experience. I think that's one of the best experiences of having a co-founder, is like living together and building your company together in your apartment. I was like, well, what if we just bring solo founders together so that they live together and they work together, and the office is attached to their living space? So this idea kind of emerged of, is there a way to kind of give that co-founder-like experience to solo founders? And that was sort of how the program evolved. And now it's a 3-month long program. We've had people, we had 6 people in the first cohort. We had 7 in the current one that we're running. And I think it's really remarkable, because I try not to use words or phrases that I come up with when I'm describing something that I've built. I try to use the words and the phrases that the people who are using the product describe it. And I'll never forget, I host this run club every Saturday. And I forget, I think it was Dravia. It was really early on in the solo founders program with the first cohort. And I overheard somebody saying to him, oh, like, what do you think about how's the solo founders program? You're a part of it, right? And I was like, I don't think that they knew that I was necessarily the earshot. So I was like, oh, like, I wonder what he's gonna say. Is he gonna like it? Is he gonna say this thing sucks? I thought he would say it was positive, but like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm a little nervous. I don't know what he's gonna say. And he said, he said, "Oh man, it's amazing. It's like I have 5 co-founders, but I get to build my own company and we're all building our own things." And so that 5 co-founders thing was something that I had never thought of before. And now when people ask me, what is the Solo Founders Program? It's like you have multiple co-founders who are supporting you, who have context on what you're building, but you still get to like have that like full authorship of what you're building. And these people also are having their own experiences and their own lessons that they can help you learn from on their end, right? And vice versa. You can share the lessons that you've had with those other people. So that was really interesting. And then another thing that that somebody described it was solo together. Like I hadn't come up with those 2 words. And in fact, I think that we had sort of thought of like solo but not alone or something clumsy like that. But this idea of solo together, that sort of the juxtaposition of those 2 words, it's actually what the product is. If you were to say like, what is Solo Founders Program? It is solo together. And ultimately that's all the things that we're doing with Solo, is we want people to feel like they're not alone when they're building their companies.
I love that. It's incredible and it's powerful. I mean, I never thought of it that way, the way you put it about that. Yeah, a lot of companies are born in your apartment living together with your co-founder, and solo founders don't have that. And that's incredibly powerful. And so what does the setup look like? So you're here in San Francisco, in the Mission District. Tell us about the space and all that fun stuff.
Sure. So, the premise again is to be like co-founders living and working together and to have that environment. And so, our perspective is founders should be scrappy. I think that generally speaking, I'm sort of against the Googleification or the fangification of startup culture where you have 10 different types of coconut water. We want to make it so that people have the ability to feel like they don't have to worry about things, but also not like they're being pampered. So ultimately we have this beautiful space. Everybody's got their own room. There's just tons of common areas. There's a full dedicated office. You walk downstairs every morning. There are already people in the office working, unless you're the first one. I think the first one gets there at 6 a.m. or something like that. And then throughout the day, it's just this constant like coming and going of people going out of the office to talk to customers, coming back, right? Some people are up working until 3 a.m. So the office is probably getting used between 6 a.m. and 3 a.m. every day. And then you have this like interesting flow of some people wake up at 11, some people wake up at 6 or up at 5:30. And I think that that's really good. And then ultimately, you've got this incredible environment for you to do your thing, but it's an environment that's been designed, and Noemi, who runs ODF, she designed the entire space. The thing that's so special about it is it feels like it's been designed for solo founders in mind. It's not like this sort of, we're not trying to create some sort of opulent space. We're trying to create a space that feels supportive, that feels welcoming, that feels like home, but also feels like a place where you really need to knuckle down and like get real work done.
I love it. I mean, this sounds like
You've been there. So what was it like to you? How would you describe it?
It's amazing. I mean, it's very comfortable. You feel at home there. It feels like a community space, right? But it also feels like, yeah, you have your privacy, so you have your room, but you have your kitchen together and you can eat together. You have the office space on the ground floor. I hear there's a jazz club, coffee shop coming soon.
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's just incredible. I mean, building a company is a huge endeavor. It's extremely painful, a lot of the time. And I think this idea of bringing together solo founders that are going through that process to be able to just do it together is super powerful. I mean, it's like Disneyland for solo founders, and and I love Disneyland. So I wouldn't say I'm a Disney adult, but I love Disneyland. Like how can people get involved, right? How does a founder who's inspired, how far along should they be when they apply?
Yeah,
all that.
So some of the people who've applied and who've joined the program, they've gotten like tens of thousands of MRR before joining. Some people have nothing but an idea, but they have a track record or a past, of showing that they can build things on their own. Funny enough, about half of the people who've done Solo Founders Program at this point have actually bootstrapped and sold something in the past, and not necessarily because they wanted to be bootstrappers, but because it unlocked something in their lives. So one person bootstrapped a company in order to be able to afford to move to a country where there was more opportunity for them after teaching themselves how to code on a Nokia phone. Crazy, right? Like super impressive, super inspiring. Just and one of the best founders that I've ever met. His company is called DocMost. His name's Philip, and he is absolutely incredible. He's got all of these people, all these large organizations, public companies, paying for his self-hosted documentation software, choosing him over Confluence and Notion. And it's just him. It's just solo, one person selling to governments and to, he's the sole engineer, sole salesperson. Unbelievable. Another Dravia, who I mentioned briefly earlier, he sold his company so he could afford to go to college in America. So all of these people were bootstrapping as a way and selling their businesses as a way of being able to unlock future opportunities so that they could go and build these much more ambitious businesses now. And I think that there's something really wonderful about that. So that's a really interesting commonality across a wide array of these people. A lot of them were already sort of dedicated to the idea of building solo, or they had some experience of building companies either solo and they liked it, or they had a co-founder experience and they said, that was good, but I want to try and do something differently this time. So I think that that's a piece of it. I would say that the backgrounds are pretty wide ranging. We have people who've worked at multiple successful startups. We have people who are relatively young. The person who's in the current cohort who's made the most revenue, they just hit $1 million in ARR in 2 months.
Wow.
And it's not one of those consumer apps that goes up fast and goes down just as quickly. I shouldn't say the name of the company, but building for a very important industry for America. They are making, about $100,000 a year per contract, maybe a little bit less. And their margins are amazing. It's not like they're selling dollars worth of tokens for 50 cents. Like this is actually a very real business that's solving a very real problem. And they've just cracked that. But again, like this is a person who had no real tangible industry experience other than an internship that gave them the insight. And now I think that they're going to become the most important business in their industry for AI. And again, they're 19 years old and they're just getting started. So, then of course, like they're the people who worked at startups and had these insights that led them to build the company and go build their company with Solo Founders Program.
Wow. And so you're getting a lot of interest in this program. How are you and the team deciding how to curate the group of founders? You mentioned a huge diversity and background. What's sort of the common thread you look for in the people applying?
So I think that the most important thing is, and this is a general statement about ODF and about Solo. And if I were a VC, how I'd be thinking about this is like, I am searching so hard to root out the people who are doing it just because they think it's the cool thing to do or the right thing to do. Like, oh, I could do a startup, and like if it doesn't work out, if that looks good, anyways on my resume. I've seen people start and shut down companies in 6 months because they raised money when it was easy to raise money and they realized, wait, this isn't actually for me. It's like, wow, what a waste of everybody's time. And, then they put it on their resume afterwards. It's crazy to me, right? They're like, yeah, I raised, and the thing on the resume is started a company, raised X million dollars. And it's like, that's not an accomplishment, right? The accomplishment is that you actually built something that changed the world and hopefully in the process changed you in a positive way, right? And that was some expression of who you were. And so what I look for when I think of solo founders is just this high degree of authorship. I think authorship is actually the most important thing when it comes to solo founders, because ultimately, there is no person to share the vision with. There's no person to share the momentum with, the momentum building with, like building like the little fire to get the kindling before it becomes like this roaring fire, right? You don't have anybody who can actually do that with. So you need to have this insane amount of drive, but I think you also have to have this insane amount of ability to be an author. And that to me is like the most important thing in the world, is authorship. I think that like, not just for solo founders, but just in general, like imagine the world without authors. And I'm using the term author in a very, very broad way. Everything from people who write books, to people who direct movies, to people who do podcasts, to people who create businesses. Authorship is the thing that actually creates things in the world. It's not a desire to make money like that. That is a good sort of additional desire. to have, because ultimately that shows an alignment of incentives. But authorship is this much more foundational aspect of who we are as people, which is the desire to express ourselves and the desire to have a vision that we put out there into the world that communicates with other people and that resonates with other people. So when I look at solo founders, I say, my goodness, they need to have this incredible level of authorship. And I think of obviously yourself as what you're building. I think that you've exhibited a great degree of authorship over the years. I think John Andrew at Wander, I think that he's just done a wonderful job. I think that all of these founders that you see that are building great companies solo, they have this belief of doing what's authentic to them. And if they are building in a space that's authentic to them, they will build a successful company, because people will understand that they understand what they're building for the customers, and the customers will like that, and the customers will feel like this is the person to buy products from, because they're doing this from a place of like authenticity and truth. And they really like that, because they don't want somebody who's just doing this as a fly-by-night operation, right? They want somebody who's doing this because they actually really believe in it and they want to do it for the future. And I think that hopefully when people, who are solo founders or thinking about building companies and considering being a solo founder, when they hear me, they say like, wow, this is a person who genuinely believes this. They're not just trying to like create some trend or cash in on some trend. There really isn't a trend yet, but maybe there will be in the future with solo founders. I hope that that's what people see when they see me, just like they see that when they see Adil at MagicSchool, Lauren at Roots, you at Fondo, John Andrew at Wander, Adil at MagicSchool, Celine at Loyal, right? Like, I think that these are the type, Paul at BrowserBase, right? Like, these are the types of people that I hope that I can at least have some degree of, people see me and they see what I'm doing with solo founders and they think that I have some degree of like authorship and like point of view, and I really care about what I'm doing here.
Wow. Well, I love it, Julian, and really appreciate you coming on today. This has been a really incredible episode. Where can we find you? Where can we get involved in all of the things?
Yeah, well, it used to be a more difficult URL, but now we haven't announced it yet. But so I guess this is like the announcement. We got the little gong.
Here we go. Let's go.
We have solofounders.com.
So it's solofounders.com. Solofounders.com.
We don't need to have any weird URL conveyances anymore. It's just solofounders.com. Make it easy for people.
Awesome. And then where can we find you?
I'm here for the next I don't know 10 minutes. No, but in all seriousness, you can find me probably. I think X is probably the best place if you want to read my rantings. I'm all on top of the solo founders stuff though. So solofounders.com is probably the main place.
Let's do it. All right, everybody, check out solofounders.com. Follow Julian at Julian Weisser on X. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Julian.
Dude, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for leading it. Like you are a solo founder. You are really somebody that I've always looked up to as somebody who's doing things their own way. And the reality is that people like you are going to be the ones who inspire so many more people to start companies in a way that's authentic to them. And that ultimately it leads to many more great successful companies that do important things in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Julian. You're too kind. I also look up to you a lot. You have started a movement multiple times in people's founding journeys, and I think anyone would be super lucky to do the solo program or get involved with ODF. So really, really proud to be a part of the community and grateful to have you on.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Fondo.com, the all-in-one accounting platform for startups.